Let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance in Nature comes in. Balance in Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance in Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. You're getting real food, real science, real nutrition. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance in Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance in Nature. And guess what? P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. Here's your host, Nick Giordano, and I got a great episode lined up for you. There's so much going on, it's impossible to decide where to start, and I am growing increasingly frustrated at everything I'm witnessing. We are living in very consequential times, both domestically and abroad. Our adversaries are growing bolder, they're gaining strength abroad, and those in power are pushing policies that significantly weaken the United States. It seems like we no longer operate on logic and what's in our best interest as a country. Instead, our politics is purely driven by emotion, and many use this vehicle to acquire more power. Every day that passes, we see the constant disregard for our Constitution. It used to be that while the political parties may have disagreed on political issues, there was a mutual appreciation for our country, the idea of America, our founders, our Constitution, and there was a mutual respect for each other. Sadly, those days are gone. We continue to see the Constitution routinely violated. We continue to hear the nonsense that America was founded on evil intent. You now have a large chorus of people who openly state that the Constitution is broken, that it needs to be done away with, and that a new Constitution needs to be developed. This shows that they know nothing about our Constitution. There's a reason that we have the oldest codified Constitution in the world. Our Constitution is not an ideological document. It is a mechanic's guide to how our government operates. It explains who is responsible for what and the powers that are granted to the institution. It explains the system of federalism and the divide between the federal government and the state governments. It's a document where we, the people, tell the government what it can do as opposed to the government telling us what our rights and our privileges are. But something far more sinister is going on. And we constantly hear about the threat to democracy, but the real threat is coming from those in power who look to target their political opposition and destroy them. This has been progressing over the last couple of decades, but over the last 2 years, it has become more blatant and obvious, and we are at a dangerous time. And that's what this episode is going to focus on. It's going to be pretty explosive, so make sure that you listen to the whole thing. I'll explain the dangerous progression and how so many of our officials shouldn't be anywhere near the positions of power, how these officials are working overtime to increase the division as they target political opponents and attempt to justify it by claiming their political opponents are evil, that they're a threat to democracy, that they're the most extreme political movement in the history of the United States. And now we are semi-fascists. Before I jump in, be sure to click the follow button so you never miss an episode and visit the P.A.S. Report website. Sign up for the newsletter. Also visit the affiliate page. I've been working with merchants in an attempt to bring P.A.S. Report listeners some great deals, and I'll be posting more merchants soon. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, I briefly want to touch on President Biden's announcement that his administration plans to forgive up to $20,000 in student loan debt per recipient. Now, I wrote a piece for Campus Reform for last week talking about how higher education institutions are destroying themselves. I'm working on a new piece about this, so I'll let you know when it's out. But this is nothing more than a shameless attempt to buy votes in the midterm elections, and no one can dispute that. So let's just be honest and call it what it is. It's a vote-buying scheme. The fact is, we are 60 days from the midterm elections. He could have announced this a year ago, or he could have announced it after the midterms, but he didn't. His team sees the polls. They see the dissatisfaction within the youth vote. They know that a key constituency, the Democrat Party, is the youth vote. And if younger Americans are dissatisfied with the administration and they stay home, then Democrats are going to have a very difficult time in the midterm elections. That's why I say it is nothing more than a shameless attempt to buy votes. And it's amazing how if we did 1/10 of what the government does, we would all be in prison. I mean, if I offered someone to pay a month of their mortgage, and in exchange, I may not say it out loud that you vote for me, but that's the intent, that's the implication, I'm going to jail for that. So do you really believe that President Biden made this announcement without the expectation of getting votes in return? And he's going to hit the campaign trail. I guarantee you he's going to tout it. Now, I don't begrudge those who are going to benefit from this program. Good for you. But let's be honest regarding what this thing is really about. And this policy does nothing to solve the problem of skyrocketing tuition rates. It does nothing to tackle the student loan crisis. It does nothing to stop the useless degree programs that can't possibly translate into real-world careers. Instead, it's a bailout to the institutions that created this problem in the first place and who already got their money. The ordinary Americans, we get shafted once again. Those who did the right thing. It's a slap in the face to all those parents who sacrificed and saved, working 2 to 3 jobs to make sure their child wouldn't graduate with debt. It's a slap in the face to those students who worked full-time while going to school so they could pay for their own education. It's a slap in the face to all those who paid back their student loans. It's a slap in the face to all those who thought they were doing the right and responsible thing. They consolidated their loans with a private lender for a lower interest rate. And it's an insult to those who didn't go to college, who didn't rack up any debt, and who decided that they were going to learn a trade. They were going to go into the real world and participate within our system. See, the message that a policy like this sends is clear. If you do the responsible thing, you're going to get shafted. You either didn't take out student loans or you paid them back, but now you're responsible for other people's student loans. And even worse is how this bill will just make the inflation problem that much worse, because you cannot print and inject $500 billion of cash into a system without consequence. You would think that everyone would have learned their lesson with the COVID stimulus money that was given out. Now, you may have received a couple of grand in COVID stimulus. It may have felt nice to have that extra cash at the time, but guess what? That's what triggered inflation in the first place. And all that money that you received from COVID, you've paid a hell of a lot more back than the stimulus you actually received. And the same thing is going to happen here if this goes through. The only difference is it's going to be worse because most people aren't going to get anything in return. We're just going to add to our national debt. Taxpayers are going to be on the hook for that debt. We're going to have to pay interest on that debt. Prices on everything we purchase are going to go up, and we're going to continue to see a rise in interest rates. So we're all going to be punished because of the Biden administration's plan. And let's not forget that the Biden administration's student debt cancellation is largely unconstitutional. And that may be the only silver lining in this thing. This policy is likely to be challenged, and the president and his administration are going to lose in the courts because he has zero authority when it comes to eliminating student debt. For the last 230 years, the Constitution has been explicitly clear. I know they don't like the Constitution. I know they view the Constitution as an inconvenience. But the Constitution matters, and the Constitution makes clear that Congress is the branch with the power of the purse. Congress is the branch that has the authority to raise revenue through Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. And they determine how tax dollars are spent, as defined in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7. Where it states that no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law. And Congress is the one that makes laws. That's pretty clear. You don't need to be a constitutional scholar to understand that. Even Speaker Pelosi understands that. Even she gets it. And if she understands it, anyone can. Because here is Speaker Pelosi in July of 2021.
People think that the President of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress.
So even she gets it. The power of the purse is one of the most important safeguards and is essential in maintaining our system of checks and balances. So how is this administration justifying this shameless attempt to buy votes? They're claiming that the president has this authority under the HEROES Act of 2003. Now, this act was crafted following the 9/11 attacks and the ensuing wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, as hundreds of thousands of U.S. military personnel, Our young men and women were called into active duty service. And these brave soldiers would go into the theater of war where some would sustain life-altering injuries and some paid the ultimate sacrifice, only to return in the United States in a flag-draped coffin. So the act was meant to allow our soldiers to modify or pause loan repayments so they wouldn't go into default while serving on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. This was the least that we could do. However, this administration is saying that the president has this authority by asserting that the coronavirus pandemic is still a national emergency. It's making a mockery of the intent of the HEROES Act, of all those that sacrifice. The act is clear and specifically defines affected individuals as members of the United States military. That's why I believe that based on the Constitution of the United States and the HEROES Act, the courts will rule Biden's move unconstitutional. And this is not the first administration to show blatant disregard for the Constitution. It's not the first time this administration has shown its lack of regard for the Constitution and the separation of powers. It's clear every day. And it's clear that this administration wants to continue down the path toward authoritarianism. And they are doing that by fostering a climate of fear and declaring endless national emergencies. This is where we get to the more dangerous topic that I want to talk about. And that's the president and the Democrats' attempt to target political opposition. There is something very sinister going on. And I cannot figure out why people aren't more openly talking about this, because I have been warning about this since the Biden administration issued their national strategy for countering domestic terrorism in June of 2021. Towards the end of last week, the president was given a speech where he ramped up the rhetoric to dangerous levels, saying that those who support the former president and approve of the America First agenda want to destroy the United States. He stated that Trump supporters are full of anger, hate, and division. And then he took it a step further and said that Trump supporters are a threat to democracy. Take a listen.
The MAGA Republicans don't just threaten our personal rights and economic security. They're a threat to our very democracy. They refuse to accept the will of the people. They embrace political violence. They don't believe in democracy. This is why, in this moment, those of you who love this country, Democrats, independents, mainstream Republicans, we must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving America than the MAGA Republicans are destroying America.
How's that for unity? Thank goodness we have the uniter-in-chief. Thank goodness for that. I wonder what my friend Vincent LaGuardia Gambini thinks of what President Biden said.
Everything that guy just says is bullshit. Thank you.
The idea that this guy is a uniter is a joke, but it's not just him. He just says whatever is in the teleprompter. Don't forget that he has an entire staff that writes his speeches. These speeches have to be approved at the highest levels within the administration, including the president's chief of staff. So this is a large number of people that actually think this way in this administration. These aren't slips of the tongue. It's not Joe Biden going off script. This is the script. So if the last clip wasn't bad enough, the president took it a step further in a private speech to deep pocket Democrat donors where he stated, quote, "What we're seeing now is the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. It's not just Trump. It's the entire philosophy that underpins the I'm going to say something. It's like semi-fascism." I want you to think about what he's saying and what he really means, because there's too many that are missing what's right in front of them, what's so clearly there to see. It goes far beyond the normal political rhetoric. He is the president of the United States. He is the commander-in-chief. His number one job, according to the Constitution and by solemn oath, is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and our way of life. Now, knowing that, let's say I give the president and his administration the benefit of the doubt that they actually believe the crap that they're putting out there, that they truly believe that Trump supporters are the biggest threat to democracy, that the America First philosophy is a danger to democracy. And if he believes that Trump supporters want to destroy democracy and that they represent the most extreme political organization to exist in American history, then what is he suggesting? What does he intend to do about it? Think about this logically. If his solemn obligation is to preserve and protect the republic from enemies, both foreign and domestic, and you have this existential threat, aren't you supposed to destroy and eliminate that threat as commander-in-chief? So how does President Biden intend to do this? That's what concerns me. And the roadmap is clear when it comes to how they intend to do this, because they want to target political opposition. All you need to do is follow the progression that's been taking place over the last 2 decades. And I want you to follow me here, because the evidence does show how these people have grown increasingly unhinged, how they've progressed from looking down on ordinary Americans to looking at the American people as a threatened enemy, from bitter clingers to domestic terrorists. Think back to when President Obama was campaigning for the presidency, where we got our first real glimpse of how the political elite view the political opposition and ordinary Americans. Remember when he said they cling to their guns and religion, that they have antipathy towards people who aren't like them, that they are anti-immigrant. I mean, that's almost verbatim. And his statement revealed how he views ordinary people. And once President Obama was in office, and then you had the debate with the Affordable Care Act, again, you had several Democrats accusing the Republican Party of wanting to kill women, children, and old people. You had Congressman Alan Grayson. He would go on the floor of the House and scream that the Republican health care plan is for the American people to die quickly. It's one thing to accuse your political opponents of having bad ideas. It's a completely different story when you attach evil motives to what they want to do, accusing them of wanting to kill innocent American civilians. But it was Congressman Grayson. So he was a loser. He was a bomb thrower. That's why he was voted out of office. But here's the thing. While Grayson is a loser, the rhetoric at the top was being ratcheted up as well throughout the Obama administration. Just remember when President Obama compared Republicans to the hardcore mullahs in Iran. Then we began to see our institutions weaponized for ideological purposes. We had the IRS openly admitted to targeting the Tea Party groups for extra scrutiny. The 2016 election got extremely contentious. And again, Hillary exposed how she really feels about the American people when she said Trump supporters are deplorable. Even worse was the collusion between the Clinton campaign and the FBI, where they would openly target a presidential candidate that they viewed as unfit for office. And I'm not going to rehash the whole Russian collusion scam, which I've spoken about several times, but this would be an important moment for the United States as we witness the FBI become politically weaponized. Now we're learning that the FBI contacted Facebook to warn them about potential Russian disinformation and the Hunter Biden laptop, even though they knew damn well that the Biden laptop was real and wasn't part of a Russian disinformation campaign, especially considering that they were investigating Hunter Biden and had the contents of the laptop since 2019. You can bet that if Facebook was contacted, Twitter and several other social media outlets were contacted as well. And the FBI knowingly influenced the 2020 elections. And if what Zuckerberg says is true, there may be criminal liability by those involved because it is illegal to electioneer in our society. Then that's certainly what happened here. We have several criminal statutes against federal officials trying to influence elections, including Title 18 U.S. Code 595, Title 18 U.S. Code 1502. There may be Hatch Act violations included. But you're not going to hear about an investigation because the elite don't investigate themselves. So they push false propaganda to suppress a story that implicates the Biden family business. They wanted to protect the big guy. And according to whistleblowers, we are now learning that they have been intentionally slow-walking the Biden investigation. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be because our FBI has become the Biden secret police force, essentially? Throughout the Trump years, President Trump and his supporters were routinely called racist, xenophobic, bigots, and white supremacists. We saw the attacks from the government apparatus, the deep state, who would do their very best to take down the duly elected president because they believe that they're the guardians of democracy. And they believe that Trump was not worthy of the dignity of the White House. And here is where we rapidly see Democrats go off the rail, where it is no longer about disagreeing with their political opposition. They now view their political opposition as the enemy, as evil. And of course, when you encounter evil, you have to destroy evil. We've all been there before. You want to get someone the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, but you have no idea what to get. Well, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. Gift baskets are perfect for any occasion, whether it's birthdays, holidays, corporate events, or a simple thank you. At designeryourselfgiftbaskets.com, you get to choose the theme and the products that go into the basket. You have a coffee lover? Try the K-Cup basket. You're looking for something special for the person that loves to barbecue? No problem. There's a basket for it. Make every basket unique to the person you're sending it to. And if you're in a rush and don't have time to customize the gift basket, it's not an issue because at DIYGB.com, you can choose from hundreds of pre-arranged baskets based on the occasion, theme, or recipient. And P.A.S. Report listeners get 10% off using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off your order. Visit DIYGB.com today. Now, fast forward to the coronavirus pandemic, where you had many people growing increasingly concerned about the draconian mandates being issued by officials who were never elected by the people. People were concerned about how their state legislative bodies were being completely disregarded, bypassed by governors, little Mussolini wannabes, who would issue unconstitutional mandates that they routinely violated themselves. And what happened when these concerned Americans exercised their First Amendment right to peaceably assemble, to petition the government for a redress of grievances? Well, over 1,200 public health officials wrote an open letter stating that anyone protesting lockdowns or mask mandates is promoting white supremacy and white nationalist ideology. In September of 2020, you had Speaker Pelosi declare Republicans in Congress as the enemies from within. That was nearly 2 months before the November elections, 4 months before January 6th. You had Congresswoman AOC declare that the Republicans in Congress are nothing more than white supremacist sympathizers. Then you have the January 6th riots, and this is going to serve as the catalyst to label and target political opposition. When talking about Trump supporters, we began to hear words like purge, deprogram, re-educate. These are all very dangerous words to use to describe political opposition. And they would begin declaring political opposition as domestic enemies, and the Biden administration would issue the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism in June of 2021. Now, I warned then that this was an ideological document designed to target political opposition. I did a whole episode going page by page explaining how this document was in the works for quite some time and how they were intentionally using vague terminology that they'd never define, like anti-government, anti-authority sentiment. The document talks about narratives that could lead to inciting domestic violent extremists. On page 10, it states that narratives, including fraud in the 2020 elections, the emboldening impact of the violent breach of the Capitol, conditions related to the COVID-19 pandemic, conspiracy theories promoting violence. They all talk about how these are going to spur domestic violent extremists and that you could be guilty of incitement if you speak about these. So if you bring up any of these topics, you may be inciting domestic violent extremism, and therefore you could be declared a domestic terrorist. Now, Republicans remain silent on this document. Silent. Most of the media remain silent. I mean, Tucker Carlson covered it, Steve Malzberg covered it, Miranda Devine covered it. But with the exception of a handful, most kept their mouths shut. They didn't realize how dangerous this document was. But it was extraordinarily dangerous because it laid out the roadmap. I explained it, how they intend to, quote unquote, counter domestic terrorism, creating partnerships with corporations, nonprofits, big tech, the financial sector, where those organizations can serve as the eyes and the ears of the government. We already know that numerous industries voluntarily turn over information about their customers to the government. So it's not like this is a big secret. We also know that this White House was flagging posts to Facebook as admitted by then Press Secretary Jen Psaki. In Pillar 2, it talks about controlling the supply and demand of information, basically censorship. On page 20, it alludes that veterans are particularly susceptible to domestic violent extremism. Does this mean that they want to mass monitor veterans even though there is zero evidence to support this notion? It talks about taking families and turning families against each other. That families are the ones that are on the front lines and that children should turn in their parents if they see something. You have Pillar 3, redefining hate crimes as domestic terrorist incidents. On page 26, it talks about expanding the terrorist watch list to include Americans expressing anti-government and anti-authority sentiments. And then you have the fourth pillar, the most dangerous of all the pillars, because it shows how this is all about politics. Pillar 4 explains that the only way to eradicate the threat of domestic terrorism is to confront the long-term contributors and implement a far leftist agenda, including radical gun control, implementing CRT and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs in curriculums throughout the country, implementing equity programs at all levels, public and private, create an equitable economy, delivering financial relief to Americans. The message is clear. You adopt a radical far-left agenda to combat the threat of domestic terrorism. So what does that mean if you oppose the radical left agenda? What does it mean then? Are you a domestic terrorist? Well, according to the Biden administration, you may well be. So let's take a look at the timeline since the national strategy has been issued. It was issued in June of 2021, and now you're going to understand why I'm concerned, because it was extremely predictable. In June of 2021, the national strategy gets issued. In September of 2021, so just 3 months later, the White House and the Department of Education encouraged the National School Boards Association to request that parents who complain about mask mandates and CRT and DIE programs be investigated as potential domestic terrorists under the Patriot Act. 5 days later, in October 2021, Attorney General Merrick Garland issues his now infamous school board memo, and the FBI begins to threat tag parents as potential domestic terrorists. And just to jump back a second, remember what I said when it came to Pillar 4 of the national strategy. One of our policies to combat domestic terrorism is to introduce CRT and DIE curriculums throughout the country. The national strategy explicitly states ensuring, quote, ensuring that Americans receive the types of civics education that promote tolerance and respect for all, and investing in policies and programs that foster civic engagement and inspire a shared commitment to American democracy, all the while acknowledging when racism and bigotry have meant that the country has fell short of living up to the founding principles, end quote. Now, no one should be surprised, knowing how Pillar 4 was developed, no one should be surprised that the Biden administration made this move to target parents because they openly stated it 4 months before that when it was released, the national strategy. So now, October 2021, we see the school board, the Attorney General issue the school board memo. 3 months after the school board memo, in January of 2022, the Justice Department announced the creation of a domestic terrorism unit that we still know very little about. We have no idea what this unit actually does or who or what they are investigating. 3 months after that, in April 2022, you had Secretary of Homeland Security Mayorkas announce the creation of the Disinformation Governance Board. This sparked enormous pushback, forcing DHS to put their new Ministry of Truth on hold. They put it on hiatus. And now, while Homeland Security has announced, the other day they announced, that they officially terminated this idea, I highly doubt that. It will be repackaged and rebranded under a different name. Don't forget, like I said, you had Press Secretary Jen Psaki admitted that the White House flags posts for Facebook and other social media companies to censor based on whatever the White House deems as disinformation. So there is a speech control program that does exist somewhere in this administration. Whether it's in the White House or the Department of Homeland Security, does it really matter? So that was April of 2022. In May of 2022, a month later, President Biden gives a speech declaring that anyone subscribing to the MAGA America First philosophy is participating in, quote, the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, recent American history, end quote. Remember, the words extremist and extremism are used over 26 times in the 30-page national strategy. So it's not a coincidence that Biden branded the entire MAGA movement the most extreme political organization in American history. And 3 months later, just 2 weeks ago, you had the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. A few days after that, the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, came out saying that you are not allowed to criticize or question the professionalism and integrity of the FBI and the Justice Department, that it's leading to increased threats, and so therefore it may be considered domestic terrorism. Who knows? Which brings us today, where the president has declared that anyone who supports Trump, not just the America First ideology, that anyone who supports Trump is a threat to democracy and wants to destroy democracy, that they're semi-fascists. And I want to make it clear, because while he did say it's MAGA Republicans, he's not just talking about Republicans. He's talking about the Republican Party. Consider that 85+% of the Republicans support President Trump, former President Trump. 50% of independents and unaffiliated voters support Trump. And even some Democrats support Trump, which means that the president is declaring nearly 50% of the country as a threat to democracy because they are intent on destroying democracy and they're semi-fascists. Knowing all this, I mean, I just laid it out for you. I don't know how much clearer I can make it for everyone. And I don't know why you don't have more conservative outlets and Republican outlets and the Republican Party itself all screaming about this. Because how long will it be before the administration officially declares MAGA a domestic terrorist organization? Now, you could say I'm crazy. You can call me a conspiracy theorist. You could say that this is far-fetched and it will never happen. But just remember, prior to the coronavirus, there was a lot of things that we said would never happen in the United States. I mean, time and time again, we constantly say that, oh, that can't possibly happen in the United States. We can't possibly turn authoritarian. It's not possible for the Biden administration to declare 50% of the country as belonging to a domestic terror organization. But that's exactly what happens when you look at the progression and the timeline I just laid out. It's all heading in one direction. And again, it doesn't take a lot of brain power to reach this conclusion. If the president's solemn oath is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and our way of life, and he and his administration really believe this is an existential threat to our way of life, and intent on destroying democracy to bring in fascism, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let this fascist movement destroy democracy if that's what they truly believe? And that's why if we don't reverse course now, it's only going to get worse. And it will be a matter of time before the president declares MAGA, the American First ideology, Trump, and any of his supporters as domestic terrorist organizations. He'll officially declare that. Trust me, because the writing is on the wall. There's nowhere else you can go. Again, this is not normal political rhetoric that's being used for political debate. And the claim that of semi-fascists is simply laughable. I mean, here you're accusing people who fought against government mandates. You're accusing people of who want smaller government, limited government. They want less government involvement in their lives, less government control in life. They're calling them the fascists. That's the amazing part. These people have no idea what fascism actually means. No idea. The same people throwing around the word fascism, the fascism label, are the same ones who wanted to keep kids out of school for years. They're the same people who forced mask mandates, vaccine mandates. They called for the destruction of livelihoods for anyone who didn't comply with their unconstitutional decrees. How much destruction did they cause to entire generations that we're going to be seeing in mental health destruction, physical health, social health? How much destruction, damage have they caused through their policies? But when you push back against these policies, you're the fascists. See, that doesn't make any sense. You know, the same people who told us that
our patience is wearing thin
are the same ones accusing their political opposition of being semi-fascist. These are the same folks that don't want parents to have any say in what their children are learning. The same ones that want to silence and censor anyone who disagrees with them. The same people who want to pack the courts, people who want to decide what laws are enforced and which ones aren't. The same people who want to cripple the Second Amendment. These are the same people who say things like this. Take a listen.
Here to say that the era of Trump and Zeldin and Molinaro, just jump on a bus and head down to Florida where you belong, okay? Get out of town. Get out of town. Because you don't represent our values. You are not New Yorkers. You're not New York.
So the same ones telling Republicans that they don't deserve to live in New York, that they don't deserve representation, to get out of New York. They're the ones that claim they're fighting against fascism? I mean, who the hell does Empress Hochul think she is? Because what she says sounds pretty fascistic to me. I mean, don't forget, she was the one that told people to be her apostles. I mean, you want to talk about cults? Be her apostles. She wears her vaccine necklace to remind herself about the vaccine and be her apostles, and she'll fire and destroy anyone who doesn't listen to her petty, tyrannical decrees. And now they want to target political opponents as domestic terrorists because, according to them, we don't have the right to think freely. They view freedom of thought as a threat to them. So if we're going to talk about fascism, let's at least be honest about what side tends to gravitate towards fascism. Let's at least be honest about that. Let's talk about that. And let's hope more people start paying attention. More people start waking up to what's really going on. Because let me tell you, if it goes down this path, when they're done with us, next they're going to come for you. And we could either bury our heads in the sand, we could ignore it, pretend like this isn't happening. But sooner or later, you're going to have to wake up to reality. So I hope you found the content of this episode informative. We need to get people to realize what's really going on here. We cannot sleep on this. We have to speak out. We have to speak up. We have to show courage. And it's not about violence, like the president says. We are not violent people. We don't want to see violence. We don't want to see the destruction of America. We just want to live our lives and be left alone. That's all we want. It's actually not too much to ask. We just want to go back to our roots and return to the principle of federalism, to limited government, to try and take away some of the power of the government and the officials who have routinely shown that they are willing to abuse their power time and time again. So that's all we want. That's not fascism. Fascism is continuing to empower the monster that exists. So share this episode with others. Don't forget to give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Take 30 seconds to write a review. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.